All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Great Data Minds. We've got a great session today. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to get logged in. We had quite a few registrations, so should be a really fun 45 minutes or so. Hoping everybody's recovered from the holiday weekend. I know I'm running some laps.
Physically or metaphorically?
Yeah.
I'm picturing the hamster wheel right now.
Right. Good morning, Laura. Welcome. Hey, Julie Burrows.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Julie. How are you?
Great. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, this is going to be a good session. I'm just going to give people a few more minutes to come in.
Great. And I'm going to monitor questions for you guys, okay?
Oh, that would be awesome. Appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, everyone put them over in chat, and we welcome collaboration too. So I'll deal them out to Matt and Mike once I start seeing them. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll just give a couple more minutes, everyone, and then we'll get started.
Mike, is there a story behind the two red figures on the shelf behind you?
So my partner has a hobby of restoring Latin American folk art.
Ah, okay.
So those are all, it's like almost a plaster of Paris kind of thing.
Okay.
And her family has been collecting them for years. And when they get chipped or broken, she brings them to the hospital here.
So I have young kids. I'm just thinking of the Toy Story movie. I want to say it was the second one when Woody gets taken and to the store owner, and he brings in the doctor that stitches him up and paints him, and shines him, and all those things. So that's the vision I'm thinking of right now.
Oh yeah, and she really gets at it. I'm surrounded by it. I've got another whole wall of them over here. I switch up every season.
You feel like you're being watched?
Oh yeah. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Great Data Minds event series. Today, we're excited and honored to have Matt Smith from Microsoft. Matt's the Chief Data Officer for the Western Enterprise region. And I want to welcome you, Matt. How are you today?
Thanks, Mike. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
All right. I'm hanging in there. Like I said, metaphorically and physically, running off the weekend. So today we're going to talk about your data strategy and your ideas around how we need to, some of the things we need to take into consideration when we're trying to accelerate a whole data culture around the organizations. And I'm excited that we're having this discussion because I still see a lot of enterprises struggling to get through it. And now it's even more exacerbated because there's some serious latent demand. If you read any of the research being put out by Gartner or McKinsey or whatever, data and analytics is going to be a huge component of the digital strategy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, let's go ahead and get started. So, some of the areas of impacting a data culture, so I am seeing shift, a paradigm shift taking place, and primarily prompted by some of the enabling technologies that are out there today. So the question of, do I still co-locate my data or not? What's your thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I think the emergence of some of the big data technologies really opened up the opportunity to, I would say, shift the economics. And so the popular 3 or 4 Vs, depending on which one, which model you prescribe to, I think we're starting to see that materialize more, Mike. Historically, a lot of companies, I would say, primarily operate their business on square data, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I would say anywhere in the range of 85% of an organization's data is square or relational, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, some of the challenges that organizations are still encountering is it's really expensive to maintain relational data at scale. And so, I think that's where the paradigm shift of the cloud and really helped that economic, right? And so what we saw was a decoupling of these expensive compute systems and the data that they would manage, right? So Hadoop was really big at the beginning of the cloud emergence, and I would say we're mainstream in cloud adoption from an enterprise standpoint. So I think north of 95% of all enterprises use some flavor of Azure, which is Microsoft's public cloud service, right? And so many of those are doing things like managing data, right? Because that's one of the most cost-effective manners of using the cloud. And so we've seen this continued adoption of, I would say, data lakes, right? So a way that we can land just the raw data about our business into some centralized repository that we can then do analysis on it. And the reason that decoupling is important in that regard is I don't need to pay for all this computational processing when I'm not doing anything with my data. So being able to just kind of turn things on and off was a huge value proposition with the cloud early on, because I can do a process job that gives me some type of actionable result or something to go do, and then I could just turn everything off and not have to pay for this massive system, and I can still access that data with the compute turned off. And so I think that is still a very interesting economic factor for cloud usage of analytics. And so I think that is one reason that we can do both, right? So kind of going back to your question is we can still centralize data in a lake, but we don't have to centralize it in one system that is, we continue to scale up or scale out, and it gets more expensive because we have to run it all the time. But we can also, have these multiple, call it business areas or functional units, or dividing boundaries based on security requirements that allow us to isolate workloads. And then ultimately, how do we make it actionable, right, is the next step. And so I would say more now than ever have we seen this proliferation of new data sources, additional, telemetry that is coming in. And when I say telemetry, it's really, adjectives of a business process, right? And so descriptors of what's taking place. So kind of connecting it back to your initial digital transformation tie in there. That's kind of the meta goal, is how can a company track or monitor as much about their business processes as possible. So how do we create that? I think Satya has used the term digital exhaust, right? So how do we capture as many signals about our business processes as possible? Because the more that we can capture, the more that we can monitor. And when we monitor, we can go make changes. And when I make a change, I want to be able to see the impact of that change. So to me, that's kind of the linchpin to when I hear digital transformation. It's how do I digitize my business processes so I can capture data about them?
Right.
So when I take action, I can monitor the impact there. So,
well, yeah, and you mentioned a little bit about the when you mentioned telemetry, and then I'm tying it back to there's a higher level of sophistication I'm starting to see around managing your cloud-based workloads, taking them up and down, and before it was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that I was supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And now it seems like it's almost being embedded into the framework where it's getting to be a little bit more automated for me,
Yeah,
or
100%.
trigger based.
Yeah. So fortunately or unfortunately, through my career path, I predated cloud when it came from a technology standpoint, which really wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it was a long time ago. So I think.
Oh, I haven't predated
Yeah,
cloud.
yeah.
No.
Well, right. So when I came into Microsoft, prior to Microsoft, it was all, hey, how many servers can we build? We're going to capitalize and depreciate the cost of this asset over time. Microsoft would always push releases roughly every 2 to 4 years. So there's this massive upgrade project that has to take place, which pulls people away for months. Lots of operational overhead, right? And as cloud started to hit mainstream, for us, it was, how do I find a VM that I can go do this installation, but I'm gonna still do this upgrade every 2 to 4 years, but I can turn my VM off and not have to pay for it, right? But I can't access that data while it's turned off. So to your point, a lot of customers would forget, leave something running, get a big bill, and ultimately the cloud providers were being penalized for that. Because like at the end of the day, the whole reason we provide those economics is for companies to do that exploration, do these activities in an efficient way. And so you saw kind of a gradual maturation that included creating policies or setting reminders, or now I can deprovision these assets on a schedule, and then based on a signal I can reprovision them. So lots of on and off and reminders, right? So like we started with the reminders, and then we moved into the policies, right? So that would kind of start to manage it on behalf. But now we're in this fully elastic managed model, right? And so I can then go provision compute on demand based on, hey, someone refreshed a report. They clicked refresh on a web page, a connection's established, a cluster is provisioned, a result set is returned, and then the cluster is deprovisioned, right? And so yeah, to your point, there's been a lot of maturity and growth in the economics and the elasticity of what the cloud provides.
And I think we're seeing that realization now that it is a more cost economic. The economics are very positive. Not to mention the flexibility and the agility that comes along with it. So I love that. So let's go back to the comment around digital exhaust, because it's about trying to get as much digital signals, whether it's event-based signals, of course, transaction evidence, right? But we're also seeing a lot more need for sensing market rhythms and world event rhythms. I mean, classic, right? We're all coming off of being penalized by. But why is it? So we need to be able to identify this digital estate before we can even start talking about, do I co-locate or not? But why is it so hard to get to the digital estate to understand it?
Yeah, I would say now is more a more volatile environment in just not using now independent of the pandemic, right? Because we talk about cloud being mainstream and enterprise. With that, like I'm using the term cloud independent of infrastructure and data state, right? So we've seen emergence of companies coming to market as a SaaS offering first, right? So in the past, a software organization would create a solution, it would get deployed on a server in a data center, it's licensed and all those great things. But now we're seeing these, not even now, this isn't new, but the proliferation of SaaS providers enables quick adoption, low cost to enter. It de-risks companies' investments in products because it's a subscription service that can be turned off at any time. And so there's benefits. And then, being that it's hosted as a multi-tenant solution, now these SaaS providers have the ability to monitor usage and telemetry and gather feedback in real time to go make innovations in their products all the time, right? So there's tons of benefits in SaaS paradigm or the SaaS shift of the market. But what that does is that exacerbates data proliferation in silos, right? Because when I go stand up a SaaS system, it's not integrated with my other business processes. So it's effectively a silo within my organization. And for me to go integrate it into a core business app like an ERP or a CRM system requires significant labor to make that happen, right? And
Yeah.
so how do we de-risk that? How do we get a holistic view of our ecosystem? Which, when we say a data estate, it's our corpus of data, right? You've got to get your arms around all of the applications and business processes that are digitized, or not digitized for that matter, and capture that, and then start to make inferences and decisions about our business that is resulting from all that data. So to me, that all of this proliferation of SaaS applications and the mergers and acquisitions that are taking place within an organization's landscape, it's never going to get easier, right? I don't know that we'll ever see a huge consolidation of the SaaS market, right? We'll see acquisitions being made by, by Microsoft or by Salesforce, right? Are probably kind of the two of the most well-known M&A companies. Amazon is big about making acquisitions as well. So that problem doesn't get any easier, other than the pattern of integrating that data. And so I think that's fundamentally probably the biggest challenge for an organization, right? Because it's one thing about capturing the data; it's another thing about integrating and unifying that data.
Yeah, yeah, and I see catalogs are getting a big play right now, and not only because I want to get my arms around the data estate so I can do cooler things to optimize my processes, to your opening comments, but I've got the likes of GDPR and CCPA and LMNOP and all the other regulations that are coming out.
LMNOP, is that a new one?
Yeah, it's a new one, right? That are forcing me to get my arms around my estate because I need to know where the customer is, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of excited about that resurgence of the catalog world and again, the sophistication that's going into that. So
yeah, I think to your point, I mean, you're seeing more compliance and regulation outside of just core finance or core health privacy data, data. And so GDPR, CCPA, like you're seeing all of these additional regulations coming out that imply financial repercussions on organizations that are not diligent about managing their data estate, right? So not only should we be doing that to keep the privacy of our customers or members or employees' information, but there's a financial hit that's associated with that. And to your point, catalog is just one aspect, but like that, great, I've got documentation about what data I have in my ecosystem, and maybe who the steward is or process owner for me to request access to that. But how do I get visibility within my ecosystem of who's accessing that? And how do I get visibility when a new system pops up or a new entry into my data estate is created? And so, one thing that, to your point, catalogs being hot, Microsoft had a data catalog back in, I want to say 2012, 2013. And we hadn't invested heavily in that offering for some time until as of recent, we just came public with a new service called Purview. And one thing that excites me about Purview is it's kind of a CDO's dream, because you're not only allowing self-service crowdsourcing about the data assets within your ecosystem, but it provides kind of like this fishing net where you can cast across your ecosystem and scan all the assets within your environment to start to take in the metadata about your systems, what systems exist. And then we use a lot of the robust heritage of AI that we have in Office to then classify that data, right? And so we're using regular expressions and machine learning models to say this pattern looks like it's an email address or physical address or a social security number. And so we can then apply classification to that data and allow, information stewards or data management owners or CDOs or compliance officers to query their entire estate and look for where is PII at within my ecosystem? And so that's really powerful, because in the past, you could do that, but you could only do it on like a declarative manner, right? I've got to put it into this catalog or into the system, whereas we're kind of casting a net and we're scanning versus, it's more of that push-pull discussion, which is to me an exciting shift in terms of how we go to market.
Well, and thinking, if anybody is responsible for implementing policies and techniques around ensuring governance, it's a dream, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the most arduous part of governance was trying to understand, how do I govern and what is it that I need to govern?
Yeah. How do you know what to govern until you know what's in your data estate, right? And so that to me is why the identification or getting your arms around your data estate is so important, because you can only govern what you know and what you can see. And so if there's all these shadow systems that are existing with critical, business data that puts your company at risk to, financial repercussions or, public scrutiny about, data leak, then, that to me, I think is, a CISO or a chief data officer's worst nightmare, is something that you can't see and you don't know about that is being impacted.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about how to achieve adoption. Julie and I do a lot of reading for the research firms. I think it was Gartner had said only 21% of analytic products that are deployed ever even get adopted. Right? And it's even lower when you start to go look at the machine learning based analytic models, right?
Yeah.
So how do you achieve, when you and I talked earlier, you had some interesting concepts, and I'd love for you to share some of those with our audience. How do you achieve adoption?
Yeah, I mean, first thing, I would categorize analytic solutions separate from machine learning, because I think machine learning in itself has operational challenges, because we ultimately need to figure out, how do we integrate this into a business process or workflow, right? But in terms of general analytics adoption, I think part of what we have seen inhibit adoption is you're moving someone's cheese, right? You're changing how they do a process, because at the end of the day, when we think of an analytics solution, we generally think about a report or dashboard or some type of UI. And so when we introduce that, it could be the greatest, most magical, wish granting device, that dashboard that's on a mobile device, and it notifies you every time something changes. But at the end of the day, your business is operated by potentially thousands of frontline workers. And so those frontline workers have been in the organization for 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years, right? Who knows how long they've been in the organization. But when you go and change the way they operate their day-to-day job, that puts a lot of that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of, impact, because at the end of the day, they're accountable to, helping customers solve problems, to selling products, to getting this widget from this place to this place. Like those are the business processes that are core to their function. And so when you go and make a change that has a huge impact in terms of how they spend their time, to me, that's the kind of the friction that's in the system around adoption. And so how do we simplify that? Well, we do two things, right? We try to create products and services that are familiar with the tools that they've been using for a long time to, reduce the technical bar or the change bar to adopt. And then, the second thing is we make the insights seamless to their experience, right?
Yeah.
So if they're using, an ERP or a CRM, or they're using a customer support system, we can take and drive all of these game-changing, big data-driven, machine learning, predictive models, and put it in the same screen that they're doing their job in every day. And so, I like to say it's changing without changing, right? And so if I know that there's a little icon, or I know that I'm sorting a list based on some propensity score, and they're not changing the way that they do their job, and they're using the same interface they've been using for years, to me, that's kind of the linchpin to the adoption curve, because we have to change as little as possible, so that the adoption increases. There's some cultural things too, right? You kind of think about the bell curve of employees, right? You've got, I I'm not a statistician, but I want to say roughly 80% of an organization falls within the middle of that bell curve. And then you've got
Got the tails.
yeah, you've got those early adopters that are always going to be your change agents. They want to try new things. They want to, do things better. And then you have the people that'll never change, right? So you're going to experiment, you're going to try new things, you're going to get feedback from those change agents. But until you land that middle part of that bell curve, that's where the acceleration momentum comes in.
So move the curve.
You got it.
Shift it, yeah. So that implies then if I'm going to get better adoption, I should be making sure I'm doing things that address the customer's needs. So how do we go about getting that voice of the customer captured?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think in terms of we're always actively soliciting our customers for feedback, right? And so we have, I would say from an adoption standpoint, we have those same customers that will adopt things early. And so what we do with the cloud is we're very scrappy, right? And so we'll come to market with something that is very MVP. Here's the vision, here's our strategy, this is the problem that we think we're hearing. And Microsoft, we're our own biggest customer, right? And so we have a whole strategy around 1P equals 3P, meaning what we build internally is what we take to market through products, right? And so we have a lot of businesses within Microsoft that our customers are in the business of as well, right? When you think about, we manufacture devices, we create software, until prior to the pandemic, we operated retail stores. So we're in the very similar businesses. And so we're always actively soliciting feedback and, taking a scrappy MVP approach to build something. And the cloud allows us to be nimble and agile around how we create and innovate, right? And so it is, call it Kanban, call it agile, call it what you want, but it's a whole closed loop process of, building something small, seeing if it works. If it doesn't work, throw it away and move on to the next thing.
Right. Learn from that and move on.
Yep. The other thing is kind of creating change programs and building brands around certain initiatives, right? And so, historically, you'd walk through the hallways and you'd see a poster in the coffee, galley, right? And you're asking, "Whoa, laser, what is that?" And so just kind of in advertising about emotions and movements and getting stewards and change agents that will advocate on your behalf, but also scale a movement through their network, right, is another great way, so that they can be a champion or a sounding board that is also feeding signals back into the program as well.
Right. Okay, cool. We got a question here. This comes from MC. What's your take on API management with regard to tools and adoption?
I think maybe I'll pivot the question a little bit more to just APIs in general, because I think to me that is kind of that linchpin back to adoption, right? So think about, how do I change as little as possible? Well, very often, an insight or an action or a machine learning model is manifested through an API call. And so, how do I integrate that system through those insights via an API? And so I would say that we still have a lot of customers that run non-modern platforms, right? So you think about, just the Herculean effort that would require to re-platform off of an SAP, for example. Right. So it's a heavy lift to go integrate an API into SAP, but for me to move into a modern platform, that's also a huge effort. And so, we can only do the best that we can with what we have. And so I think in that scenario, we tend to kind of rely back on batch data driven, processes to drive that. So we may not be able to, do real-time integration per se, but, we can plan accordingly. So we might have an overnight job that is pre-stack ranking, someone's task list for the next day using a model, but we're using back-end systems to do that, right? So it's a little bit more rigid, but, so I think the question of API management is a relevant one, because to me, that's kind of that catalyst of changing without changing.
Yep. I think it also, I am a firm believer that when I'm defining my data products for the purposes of enabling analytic products and or helping optimize some business functions, the definition of that data product should always include API services to that product, right? And back to your scrappy MVP, which I love that, minimum viable product, being able to roll out a good architecture that's microservices oriented, I think is an incredibly important component for us all to consider when we're building data products.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, I mean, our core platforms for data, we have really two, right? We have Power BI, which, that kind of goes back to, boy, this feels a lot like Office. It's moved really quickly. We decoupled it from Excel so that we could move faster. And now it's been, I think we're in over 21 years in a row where we're a leader in the Magic Quadrant in BI and analytics, right? So the acceleration curve of adoption of Power BI has been unbelievable. But, core to Power BI, you look at what we did is we took the analytics professional used to require about 4 functions, right? You had to access the data, you had to format the data, you had to optimize the data, you create metrics and visualize. And so pre-Power BI, we had 4 different products, albeit under a SQL Server umbrella, that required their own server, their own configuration, integrated well together, but it was a heavy lift, right? And it was very rigid. So we took those all and put them into one desktop tool, right?
Yeah.
And we provided the entire backend as a service. But along that notion is, how do we adopt AI, right? Because we know that data science requires its own skill set, its own knowledge. And so, part of, back to that API discussion, is we have all these pre-trained AI solutions that we call cognitive services. And so if I need to do sight vision, sound, sentiment, any descriptor about the data, we have an API that you can just hook into. And so when you think about the audience of Power BI, it's someone that is able to work with Excel, right? So they're not necessarily a data professional that is writing complex SQL statements. So how do you enable someone that can write macros and, create pivot tables? How do you enable them to call a machine learning model, right? So, there's these gaps we need to address. And so by being able to just register, hey, I want to call this API to get sentiment about the data that's in this field or this row, we have to create very simple UIs to facilitate that process. Because for us, it's all about taking game-changing, latest, greatest technology innovation and making it consumable by the masses, right? We're always thinking about usability and simplicity across the platform.
Cool. So you talked about digital transformation early on as well. And I continually read and hear about digital transformation, and I scratch my head and I say, I wonder what they really mean by that. So can you double click on digital transformation? Tell me what that means from your data strategy perspective. That was a mouthful.
No, that's good. I don't know. I mean, can we still call it a buzzword? I don't know.
Unpack that, Matt.
So I alluded to it earlier today. So digital transformation to me it's about being able to track and measure everything about a business process as to the extent we can, right? And so when you think about traditionally, we would have these kind of large applications to do things like manage inventory and supply chain,
right?
But they're not, like, we've seen within the last 2 weeks, the impact that one freight ship can have on a global supply chain. And so that's not captured in your ERP anywhere. And you can't, if you're not watching the news, you're not going to know that the inventory that you have in your warehouses are now not sufficient for the next month. And you're probably going to go 3 to 4 to 5 weeks before getting your next shipment of inventory as a result of the Suez Canal. So that's a great digital transformation discussion, because it's how am I capturing as much telemetry at every single point within my global supply chain, if we're using that example, so as quickly as possible, so that when that happens, I know that I can purchase from a supplier or distributor. I can move product from one retail location to another. You know what I mean? Those are the great examples. And if I can't measure, then I can't track. And if I can't track and make decisions, I can't see the repercussions of those decisions as well. And so more now than ever, not only is it tracking within our own system, but it's also how can I identify and subscribe to data that I don't own and that I don't create?
Right.
Because to me, that go figure, I'm going to say digital transformation is all about data, right? Go figure. Might be biased in that discussion, but it all comes down to how can I track as much as possible so that when something changes or I make a decision, I can see the impact of that decision. So then I can go and track and monitor the repercussions of that. So it is that the data supply chain about a business.
Yeah.
Because we can do this now, and many companies are doing this now, and it's just a question of how do I start with one business unit and continue to fan out across those business units, and kind of going back to your earlier question, getting user feedback. What are the biggest revenue generating business processes within my organization, and how do I prioritize my transformation efforts to those, right? That we're driving impact. And so when we think about data monetization as a topic, that's a way of monetizing your data, right?
Yeah.
You're not selling your data, but you're using your data to optimize your operations that ultimately will increase revenue or decrease costs as well.
So
Hopefully I unpacked that a bit, but
you unpacked it really well, because the more focused I am around digitizing the telemetry around my applications, the more I can enable my agility as an organization to be able to start pivoting or persevering, right? And if companies are not seeing this after 2020 and now the Suez Canal and how it impacted in an entire world, every industry, every individual, and start to wake up and realize we got to get agile. And we got to be able to act very quickly. We need to constantly monitor where, if I got high revenue generating processes, where are they at risk right now? I need to have a sense of urgency around it.
Yeah, I mean, Suez Canal is the most recent, but within the last year, right, we saw a pretty large catastrophe happen in the Texas region with weather conditions and power outages. Right, huge impact to the nation and that region of the country. Pandemic, right? Just social distancing alone having impact on folks that are staffing in manufacturing facilities. So I'm still manufacturing product, but I'm doing it with the skeleton crew so that I don't have to shut down completely. So these huge events they're not going away. Like you can't predict these things to happen, and so it is necessitating agility, which is creating the it's the need. It's not even the want to transform, because so many companies have been unfortunately impacted by the pandemic and have gone out of business as a result of things that were out of their hands, right? And how do we put a plan in place to mitigate that risk to the extent that we can? We have to get a more real-time view on everything that impacts our business.
And that kind of brings me to another thought. If I'm going to get on this digital transformation thing, and I'm going to democratize my data, and I'm going to get agile, acting on digital exhaust, if you will, what's inhibiting that cultural change? We hear about the data culture, and we're not enabling a data culture. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think skill sets is probably the one that jumps out to me. You've got latest, greatest emerging technologies that are created to solve a problem. And so I now have to reskill a workforce. So it's, for us to, there's options, right? There's training. You're going to have those change agents, those folks that are always pushing the curve and looking for new ways of solving problems. So the question is how do we scale that, right? How do we grow that audience? We do it through education, right? So, institutions, universities will educate the next generation workforces on the relevant industry skill sets. But, you know, data science is a great example there, right? So every college institution at this point has probably likely a data science program. They're fundamentally grounded on, you know, Python and R, kind of the most well-known technology or languages that are used to facilitate that process. And then they have these business and statistic courses to kind of give folks the domain context to go have a meaningful business conversation. So skilling universities, right? And then training is another way. And then for Microsoft, one approach that we do is we try to use skills of today, but back it by the next gen, you know, technology and platform. So great example, our second platform, biggest platform in the data estate is Azure Synapse. It's a suite of products that is a cloud scale big data and analytics platform. As a service, runs on our cloud. We have a number of options that just for, call it data wrangling alone, where we have a number of options, right? You can, you know, really what's changing the data wrangling ecosystem is Spark as a technology, because it does a really good job of you know, scaling from a performance standpoint, data engineering tasks, right? So I'm eliminating the need to manage big, you know, create and manage big clusters and, you know, logically partition my data across the compute that it's going to run against. So what we do, our approach to that is, okay, we've got this phenomenal technology that is Spark that does a great job of sharing, you know, data sets across a large compute environment. But we can't go ask all of our customers to learn Scala or Java or all these very advanced low-level technologies to take advantage of that. So what we do is we build services that sit on top of those game-changing technologies that make it way easier to adopt. So something like Azure Data Factory is a visual drag and drop approach to do data transformation. So we can allow users and developers to have an Excel-like experience that allows them to pivot and transform and filter and do all these great things with data. Under the covers, it's executing against a Spark runtime, but the front end is this nice visual drag and drop in. So, you know, we can then insulate our customers from taking dependencies on very low level technologies, and Microsoft can kind of carry the weight of that. And so they're getting the greatest capabilities of what Spark brings to the table in cluster management and elastic pricing, but they're just using a Power Query interface if you're familiar with Power BI, or they're using an SSIS interface if you're familiar with SSIS as an ETL to get that benefit.
Yeah, so again, these low code and no code enabling platforms are helping us not have to be so dependent on specialized skills. And we can get the scale, which I love. I mean, I'm a big fan.
We're a software organization as well. So we've got to, you know, adopt these game-changing technologies, because that's where the industry is taking us. There's fundamental problems in all these approaches. So how do we overcome those approaches? So, you know, we build development tools for other software companies as well, right? And so not only do we need to provide a user interface to drag and drop to use Spark, but we also have to create professional developer tools for other development companies to take advantage of Spark as an example. And so, you know, the benefit we have here is we can provide an offering for those data professionals or sophisticated data scientists, because we have to do that internally for ourselves as well. And then we bring it to the masses. The metric I saw is we hired over 25,000 employees just during the pandemic alone. So like, we have a lot of information workers that are not professional data scientists either. So we've got this nice mix of both personas, fundamentally grounded on the same platforms internally behind the scenes.
Yeah. And when we were talking about the culture, you mentioned education. You guys do quite a bit of focus around education. Is that where data literacy starts to come into play?
Yeah, I think to me, data literacy is kind of a byproduct of adoption, right? Or maybe adoption is a byproduct of data literacy. I'm not sure it's the chicken and egg discussion there, but I think one of the biggest things is maybe having an executive sponsorship, right? So many organizations will make gut-based decisions about, how they're going to approach a market or adjust a process.
Mhm.
And so how do we become as educated as possible about that decision? Well, we have to capture more data about that business
Mhm.
process. It kind of comes back to digital transformation. But when you have an executive that leads by doing,
Mm.
and they're the ones sponsoring what is an acceptable decision and how did we come to that decision. How we do that at Microsoft, it hasn't happened overnight, but even within our field sales operations, everything from an individual seller or a specialist all the way up to the CEO uses the same Power BI set of dashboards and analytics. So not only are we, we've got the executive support. So Satya looks at those same reports and dashboards. Our, area leads do, our specialists do, and they all get fed from the same, CRM system where we will, track and monitor consumption or adoption or, revenue opportunities that we forecast. And so when you just centralize on the same platform, you've got one version of the truth. We're all looking at the same, screen and dashboard. No one has a different number than somebody else. And so to me, that's kind of fundamental to data literacy is it is kind of this adoption and literacy discussion that come together. But
Yeah.
it has to be, having a visible sponsor to say, this is how we're going to do this. And if I'm not getting this, let me show you how we get it from the system that everybody is working on. Because when we go and create our own dashboards and spreadsheets and reports, we now are not talking the same language on the same set of numbers. And that's what causes confusion and inaccuracy around business decisions.
Yeah. And the leader's role, a lot of people are talking about change management, right? As a part of helping with change resistance. But I think the more important consideration is change leadership. Those leaders have to exemplify the goodness in change, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and learn it all is a term that we use heavily, right? It's something that Satya said very early on. He came on shortly after I started at Microsoft, and he's very empathetic as a human being, and he brings that to the role. And the term he said is how do we go from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls? Because we're never gonna, there's always gonna be something we don't know, right? And so how do we break down kind of the stigma and the animosity around who's the smartest person in the room when we've got a lot of type A personalities. And so we have to do that with empathy and compassion. And we've got to, allow people to have a voice. And so another big push for Microsoft as a company is actively being diverse and inclusive in our hiring process, because we know that differing points of views brings the constructive tension to question decisions and look at things more holistically. And so it all kind of brings back into that culture of learning it all.
Yep. Ask Satya if we can use that quote in our in our human section. I love that.
I think we have coffee in about 10 minutes, so I'll bring it up in our chat.
Okay, there you go. We have one question. You may have already answered it, but what type of data analytics will drive adoption in the next 3 to 5 years? Is it going to be OLAP or OLTP? How does this affect data modeling in the future? Maybe more NoSQL?
Wow, that's a complex topic. I think we're going to see more diverse data platforms, right? You're already seeing this with, if you're following Azure Synapse or even Power BI, we're kind of giving the ability to process data in the most effective way for the use case. And so, NoSQL we're seeing emerge heavily in modern applications where we know there's a high concurrency or global nature that we need to enforce consistency. And then we're developing platforms to allow analytics on top of that. So, NoSQL platforms, as an example, historically are optimized for high concurrency read-write operations. may not be as optimized or tuned for analytics. And so in the past, we'd say, hey, plumb it out and put it into a big data platform to do analytics. The way we're pivoting to that is we're creating these basically Synapse Link is, if you look up MC, if you look up Synapse Link, is a great paradigm shift that we're doing. And so what we've done is we've put an analytical index on top of NoSQL data. And then for customers, we're managing the synchronization of the data. So doesn't require ETL to do that. But now we're giving sub-second query responses for analytical scans, aggregation queries on top of that NoSQL data. And so when we look at, not everybody can use Cosmos DB, maybe it's a packaged application. So, the plan is like, how do we take that model where we're getting the operational and analytic, we call it HTAP, hybrid transactional analytical processing, and, fanning that out across the surface area of relational database engines. So, or even NoSQL engines. And so, how do we put that on top of a SQL Server database? Because we know that's probably one of the most globally adopted platforms. So the same concept applies. And if you're familiar with SQL Server, we've had these in-memory clustered column store indexes, right? And so taking the management aspects away from customers, you no longer have to rebuild indexes and update statistics. We'll manage that for you because we can do that within our control plane in the cloud. I think that's an interesting paradigm shift because it is creating that bridge between OLTP and OLAP, but we no longer are forcing customers to create this complex synchronization pipeline process to manage that. When we run it as a service in the cloud, it's just something you click on, and we're provisioning compute and all that synchronization behind the scenes for our customers.
I absolutely love what has happened in our industry in the last 7 years. Yeah, it's an exciting such time. Exciting time. Yeah, definitely. So when I was at Dell, Dell and Microsoft, of course, partner a lot. Yeah. And I remember and recall a lot of thought leadership and industry research coming out of Microsoft. Can you tell us about that? And does that research get made available out to the public?
It does. Yeah. So one great example of that is we created a new SQL engine called Polaris, a Polaris runtime, I think is what it's called. And so that was the research that Microsoft did internally to create our latest Azure Synapse serverless data warehouse. So we now have a data warehouse that is pay per query. We actually have a free promo right now that we're giving away 10 terabytes per month of data processed through this engine for free through July. So for those listening, I encourage you to take a look at that. But all that research has been published, right? So we've got a lot of thought leadership in terms of, the cloud scale requirements, is the diverse data types that need to be addressed. So MSR, Microsoft Research, has been, that's been part of our organization for roughly 30 years at this point. We've got over 1,000 researchers in the organization, 8 different labs across the globe. We account for 22,000 white papers, 4,000 patents, like lots of smart people. And so all of that hard work is, being done to simplify the experience for our customers. So we want to give these innovative, game-changing capabilities to our customers in a way that they can actually adopt and digest it. So that's the engine that feeds into the Microsoft products and services that are built every single day. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, sir. We're coming up on top of the hour. So if you had one final critical takeaway to leave everybody with, what would that be?
Get started. Yeah.
Get started.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to me, there's so much focus around what tool to use, or, how can we get that data? There's a lot of focus and angst up front in a data project that prevents us from adoption. And so the reality is with the cloud, we can try something within a day or two. We can figure out if it's yielding fruit or not. And then if it's not, we throw it away and move on to the next one. So like it's more about how do I get the velocity and agility with our business processes and can I rely on a cloud scaler like Microsoft to provide the platform for me to build on? And so get started. I mentioned, the free quantity offer that's available. And then the Azure Purview piece, we also have free scanning of Power BI and SQL free in preview as well. So lots of stuff you can do right now without even paying a cent.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Well, Matt, thank you very much, sir. Incredible dialogue we had today. I really appreciate your thoughts. And just to let everybody know, sorry, Julie, go ahead.
I said, great job, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. And just a reminder for everyone, hit Great Data Minds events. We've got some great events coming up. We've got our Standing Up a Data Ops Practice workshop series, and then we have another round of our Path to Modern Analytics executive workshop series coming up. So please check that out. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Matt, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate the time. Yep.
Yeah, likewise. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.